When the world was at war, American kitchens became battlegrounds of their own where creativity, courage, and survival simmered in every pot. From vinegar pies to potato peel croquettes, these weren't just recipes, they were lifelines. Families turned scraps into supper, weeds into nutrition, and simple staples into wartime miracles. Today, we're diving deep into some forgotten recipes from America's toughest times, dishes born out of ration books, backyard gardens, and pure resilience. Some may surprise you, some may shock you, and a few might just win a place on your plate again. So get ready, because what you're about to see isn't just food, it's history served hot. 01. Wartime Wiggle Jello, the sweet distraction that wiggled through hard times. During the darkest days of World War II, when sugar was rationed and bright colors were rare luxuries, something magical appeared on America's dining tables: wartime Wiggle Jello. This wasn't the fancy gelatin mold you might picture from a 1950s potluck. No, this was a clever reinvention. Housewives, desperate to lift their family's spirits, used whatever scraps they had left over: canned fruit juice, a pinch of unflavored gelatin, and if they were lucky, a few chopped carrots, celery, or even beets for texture and color. Instead of sugar, they sweetened it with wartime-approved alternatives like honey or corn syrup. And to stretch every bit further, they poured it into reused molds, tin cans, casserole dishes, even empty soup tins. When it finally set in the icebox, it came out jiggly, weirdly wonderful, and full of hope. For children, it was like a treat from another world, bright, bouncy, and slightly sweet. For adults, it was a momentary escape, a reminder that even in lean times, joy could still wiggle its way in. What made wartime Wiggle Jello special wasn't the ingredients. It was the intent. It was a mother trying to bring a smile to her kids' faces with almost nothing. It was a centerpiece at the table when meat and butter had disappeared. It was proof that color could survive even in a gray world. Today, it may seem like a quirky relic of the past, but behind every wobbly slice lies a story of resilience, creativity, and love. So next time you see Jello, don't just think of cafeteria trays. Think of the women who made it wiggle during war, and the families who smiled despite it all. 02. Potato peel croquettes, turning trash into a wartime treasure. In a time when not even a single peel could go to waste, wartime kitchens discovered gold in what others threw away: potato skins. And from these scraps was born a humble miracle: potato peel croquettes. During World War II, Americans were urged to use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. Housewives, already masters of stretching a meal, started saving the skins from their potatoes, skins that once went straight to the trash. Boiled until tender, mashed with a touch of margarine, leftover breadcrumbs, maybe even a sprinkle of dried herbs or powdered onion, these peels were transformed into croquettes. Shaped into patties or small ovals, they were pan-fried until golden and crispy on the outside, warm and soft within. If there was leftover meat or gravy, even better. But most often, these croquettes stood proudly on their own, served with pickles, a spoonful of mustard, or a cup of thin soup. What made them special wasn't just how they tasted, it was what they represented. These croquettes were resourcefulness on a plate. In an era when every ration point mattered and store shelves sat bare, people found flavor and dignity in the discard pile. Children who once turned their noses up at peels suddenly loved the crunch. And for the mothers who made them, there was pride in knowing they'd squeezed one more meal out of what the world deemed waste. Today, potato peel croquettes remind us of a powerful truth: good food isn't about fancy ingredients, it's about care, ingenuity, and love stirred into every bite. So the next time you peel a potato, pause a moment. Because in another time, that peel could have been dinner, and a delicious one at that. 03. Bread and butter pickles, the sweet crunch that saved a garden. When fresh food was scarce and refrigeration was even scarcer, American families turned to an old-time trick to preserve their garden bounty: pickling. And in the thick of the Great Depression and wartime rationing, bread and butter pickles became a kitchen hero. The story goes that a struggling Illinois couple, the Fannings, traded these sweet pickles for groceries during the 1920s, offering jars in exchange for staples like bread and butter. Hence the name. But by the 1930s and 40s, they were a household staple from coast to coast. Made from overgrown cucumbers that had become too seedy for slicing, these pickles were sliced thin, then soaked in a syrupy brine of vinegar, sugar, mustard seeds, celery seeds, and turmeric. The result? A perfect balance of tangy and sweet with a crisp bite and a flavor that made plain bread feel like a treat. In war kitchens, they were a saving grace. You didn't need fresh meat or fancy spreads. Just a couple of slices of homemade bread, a smear of margarine, and a generous layer of bread and butter pickles made for a satisfying sandwich, crunchy, flavorful, and nourishing. These pickles weren't just about taste, they were about survival. They let families stretch meals further, brighten bland dishes, and preserve a harvest that might otherwise spoil. And in a time when every meal mattered, they reminded folks that with a little sugar and spice, even the humblest produce could shine. Today, we often think of them as old-fashioned. But one bite takes you straight back to the root cellars and kitchen tables of a different America, one where ingenuity flavored every jar. So next time you crunch into a bread and butter pickle, know this: you're tasting more than vinegar and cucumber. You're tasting history, survival, and the sweet side of making do. 04. Corned beef hash patties, a crispy bite of wartime comfort. When the meat rationing hit hard during World War II, Americans had to get creative with every last scrap. Enter the hero of the wartime breakfast table, corned beef hash patties. Originally a way to use up leftovers from Sunday dinner, these patties evolved into a standalone favorite. Canned corned beef, cheap, shelf-stable, and widely distributed during the war, became the protein of the people. Paired with boiled or mashed potatoes, chopped onions, and sometimes a bit of leftover gravy or breadcrumbs, these humble ingredients were mixed, shaped into patties, and fried until crisp and golden. The sizzle in the pan was enough to bring kids to the table. Crispy on the outside, warm and savory on the inside, these hash patties turned scraps into something deeply comforting. No need for expensive spices, just a little black pepper, a hot skillet, and a good cook's intuition. These weren't just about feeding a family, they were about feeling full in lean times. And while they might not have been glamorous, they were reliable. You could find them at breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Served with eggs, between slices of bread, or even on their own with a splash of ketchup or mustard. For many families, this dish carried emotion. It was what Dad asked for when he came home from work at the factory. It was what kids learned to cook for the first time. And it was what Mom made on Monday mornings to stretch Sunday's dinner just a little bit further. Today, they've faded into memory, but back then, corned beef hash patties were a symbol of endurance, thrift, and warmth. They were the food of survival wrapped in a crispy golden crust. So if you ever find yourself with a can of corned beef and some leftover potatoes, give it a try. You won't just be cooking, you'll be reviving a piece of history. 05. Sunshine Salad Surprise, a bright bite in dark times. In the middle of war and worry, there was one dish that dared to shine: Sunshine Salad Surprise. Born in the 1940s, when fresh produce was scarce and canned goods ruled the pantry, this jiggly citrus salad brought a pop of color to otherwise gray dinner tables. At first glance, it looked like dessert. But Sunshine Salad was more than sweet, it was cleverly nutritious. Housewives would take a package of lemon or orange gelatin, one of the few colorful luxuries still available, and mix in grated carrots, crushed canned pineapple, and sometimes chopped celery. Set in a mold or simple dish, it was chilled until it wobbled with pride. The surprise came in the texture. The crunch of carrots, the juicy sweetness of pineapple, and the tang of citrus all fused into something unexpectedly bright and lively. It was a trick of the eye and the palate, a salad disguised as a treat, served on lettuce leaves or small glass plates with pride. Why was it so beloved? Because it gave families something cheerful in uncertain times. It was served at potlucks, church dinners, and family picnics. It didn't rely on fresh milk or eggs, and every ingredient came from a shelf or root cellar. Children loved the color and bounce, adults appreciated that it used what was on hand and made it beautiful. Sunshine salad stood as a symbol of hope. Even if meat was missing, even if the bread was stale, this bright little side dish said, "We're okay. We still have sunshine." Today, it might feel retro or quirky. But back then, it was a small celebration in a glass bowl. So if you ever wonder how joy tasted in the 1940s, take a bite of sunshine salad. It didn't just feed a family, it reminded them to smile. 06. Dandelion green fritters, from backyard weed to Depression-era feast. Before supermarkets lined every corner and produce came in plastic bags, families knew the land and their lawns better than most of us ever will. And one of the greatest hidden treasures growing right underfoot? Dandelion greens. During the Great Depression and throughout wartime America, foraging wasn't a hobby, it was a necessity. Dandelion greens, often dismissed as weeds, became a lifeline for rural and urban families alike. Packed with vitamins and easy to find, they were one of the first signs of spring and a promise that meals might get a little greener. One of the most beloved ways to prepare them? Dandelion green fritters. Mothers would head outside with a basket and children in tow, picking the youngest, tenderest leaves before the flowers bloomed. Back in the kitchen, the greens were washed thoroughly, chopped fine, and mixed into a simple batter, usually flour, a pinch of salt, water, and maybe an egg if it could be spared. Some added onion or garlic powder, others used leftover bacon grease for frying, if they had it. Dropped by spoonfuls into a hot cast-iron skillet, these fritters sizzled into crispy, savory cakes slightly bitter from the greens, but delicious when served hot with a splash of vinegar or a dollop of mustard. They weren't fancy, but they were filling. And more than that, they were empowering. These fritters turned a so-called wheat into a wholesome meal, reminding families that the earth still gave freely even when the stores did not. Dandelion green fritters tell a story of resilience, resourcefulness, and deep respect for the land. In every golden bite, there's a lesson: what we overlook might just be exactly what we need. So the next time you see a patch of dandelions, don't just see weeds. See what our grandmothers saw: a meal waiting to be made, from the roots of hard times. 07. Peanut butter and onion sandwich, the strangest sandwich that actually worked. At first glance, it sounds like a dare: peanut butter and raw onion on bread? But during the Great Depression and into wartime America, this odd couple became an unexpected classic in lunch pails across the country. Why? Because it was cheap, it was available, and somehow, it worked. Peanut butter, first mass-produced in the early 1900s, became a protein-packed staple during rationing. It didn't need refrigeration, was filling, and kept well in a pantry. Onions, meanwhile, were among the most accessible vegetables, cheap to grow, store, and ship. So when families were out of meat, cheese, or butter, they got inventive. Someone, somewhere, sliced a raw onion, usually white or yellow, laid it between two slices of bread slathered with peanut butter, and made culinary history. The flavor? Surprisingly complex. The creamy, nutty richness of the peanut butter mixed with the sharp, slightly sweet bite of onion created a sandwich that was bold, satisfying, and completely unforgettable. The crunch of raw onion added texture, while the bread held it all together, usually plain, sometimes toasted, often homemade. Some folks added a little salt. Others swore by a dash of pepper or mustard. And for laborers heading into fields or factories, this was a sandwich that stuck to your ribs. It wasn't about taste alone, it was about survival and practicality. This sandwich didn't spoil, didn't cost much, and gave people the energy to keep going. It was strange comfort in an even stranger time. Today, it's more of a curiosity, something whispered about in retro food forums or mentioned in grandpa's stories. But back then? It was lunch. Regular, dependable, and quietly heroic. So if you ever find yourself short on options or just curious, give it a try. You might just discover what millions did nearly a century ago, that the oddest pairings often come from the hardest times, and sometimes, they're the ones we remember the most. 08. War Garden Cabbage, the unsung hero of victory meals. In wartime America, front yards became farmland. Backyard plots, windowsill planters, and city parks turned into rows of precious crops. These were victory gardens, and one vegetable reigned supreme among them: cabbage. Why cabbage? It was easy to grow, hardy in all seasons, and packed with vitamins that families desperately needed. But more importantly, it could stretch into countless meals. One of the simplest and most beloved was War Garden cabbage. This dish was more than boiled greens. Housewives took chopped cabbage straight from their gardens and sautéed it with onions and lard or bacon grease if they had it. Sometimes they added a splash of vinegar, a pinch of sugar, and if they were really lucky, a crumble of leftover sausage or salt pork. The result was tender, tangy, and deeply satisfying. Served over mashed potatoes, scooped onto toast, or eaten right from the pan, War Garden cabbage was a humble meal with big meaning. For many, it represented freedom. Growing your own food meant relying less on rationed goods. Every head of cabbage pulled from the earth felt like a small victory, proof that even in wartime, Americans could feed themselves with dignity and determination. Children learned to eat cabbage rows before they could read. Women swapped cabbage recipes like secrets. And across the country, the smell of simmering greens became a quiet anthem of perseverance. Today, War Garden cabbage is rarely found in cookbooks, but it lives on in the memories of those who saw what food could mean when times were tight. It's not flashy. It's not fancy. But it fed a nation when it mattered most. So the next time you slice into a cabbage, think beyond coleslaw. Think of backyards turned to battlefields of nourishment, and the quiet pride of a garden-grown meal. These weren't just recipes, they were survival stories told through food. From garden-grown cabbage to jiggling Jello, every dish whispered the same message: we made do, we held on, and we fed our families with love. If you felt the history in every bite, don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten recipes that shaped America's table. Because sometimes, the meals we leave behind are the ones that tell us who we really are.